Okay. Hello, Alan. I'm Felice Garcia, and I will be moderating the introduction to the questions and the first two questions. But before I start with that, I would like to give you a minute to do your own introduction.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Ouray, Colorado. My folks ran a modest motel. I got a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Colorado in 1975, a master's degree in agronomy from Colorado State in 1979. I worked for a number of years as a coal mine regulator in both Missouri and then here in New Mexico. Met my wife in Santa Fe. She was a lawyer. I decided that might be something that I could do. So I went to school at Berkeley, graduated there in 1990. And for the past 30 years, I've been a transactional lawyer here in Albuquerque in private practice. I've got 2 adult children, both of whom are test tube babies.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction, Alan. So I will start with an introduction and just an outline about the questions. So first, hello to everybody. It's great to see everybody attending this important forum of this important race. We miss meeting you all in our regular meetings and hope everybody is healthy. And thanks for taking the time to join us. So this is our third Nasty Women New Mexico Candidate Forum, and my name is Felice Garcia, and I'm the founder of Nasty Women New Mexico. And along with fellow Nasty Women New Mexico member Paula Jackson, we'll be moderating tonight's forum. Tonight, we're featuring 2 Democratic candidates from New Mexico District 10. If you're a District 10 resident, thank you for watching the forum for a race that will directly affect you. So I'm going to move on to the outline of the questions and let you know how it will work this evening. Oh, sorry, I was only supposed to say that once. I think we've gotten that all. So then I will move on to the first question for Alan, and I'm going to do an introduction of the question again for Alan. So the crises that we've been facing in New Mexico for decades have been amplified by this pandemic. It has shown us how normal has not worked very well for the people of our beautiful state. It's exposed how ill-prepared and inadequate the existing systems and institutions are in addressing the basic needs and rights of much of our population. It's highlighted the inequities and economic security in New Mexico, the fragility of our social structure, and the overall instability of our economy. The absence of racial and cultural awareness while addressing our many challenges has disproportionately burdened families, undervalued workers, the Native American population, the elderly, the poor, homeless, and disabled, those that are most vulnerable in our communities. Yet it has also given us the opportunity to see how important effective, good leadership can be, and to redefine what normal is as we face growing global crises, lack of clean water, climate-related disasters, mass migrations, the economic impact of plummeting gas and oil prices, and trade and supply disruptions. So, Alan, our first question is, how do you see state government addressing these challenges in a systemic way to mitigate those impacts and better prepare for the future of New Mexico?
Well, I only have 2.5 minutes, so I have to focus on one thing, I think. And that is, how do I hope to see New Mexico change as a result of this pandemic? And the answer to that is I certainly hope that we come out of this with a more diversified economy. In my 30-year career here in New Mexico, I've worked on many economic development projects, and I think there are a variety of problems with them. We have the subsidy project, you give us IRBs and we'll open our plant in your state. The difficulty with that is we're just bidding against other states. It's a zero-sum game. Another alternative is the high-tech project. Let's invest in this high-tech technology because it's going to be a great thing 10 or 15 years from now. And the problem with that is that the high-tech business is highly mobile. A new technology may spend its childhood here in New Mexico, but when it becomes a teenager, it runs away to California. So I think that looking forward, we need sort of a different standard for economic development. We need to have two principles. One is that economic development needs to have some firm geographical link to New Mexico. And the second thing is that we need to it needs to involve a market that exists right now, not something that's going to come to fruition in 10 or 15 years. And two things come to mind. One is wind energy. The market is Southern California and Arizona. It exists right now. It's very strong. They want our wind energy for their nighttime use. And we need to construct enough transmission capacity to carry that power from the Eastern Plains westward to Arizona. The other thing is to make New Mexico a preferred retirement destination. We have the climate, we have the scenery. Our property taxes are actually very low. I do think we need to exempt the Social Security benefits from the state tax. But basically, we need a marketing plan that goes to people in Minnesota and Ohio and whatever and says, you know, New Mexico would be a great place to spend the rest of your life, because it really would. So I think, you know, diversification is key, and those are the things that I would concentrate on. I'm sorry, I can't hear anything.
Okay, sorry, I needed to unmute myself. We have a question for you. So you mentioned broadband earlier.
No, I did not.
I'm sorry, you mentioned tech. What about broadband for all of New Mexico, including rural and native peoples?
Well, we need to build it out for sure. But, you know, there does come a point where it's just not economical. I mean, I don't think that we can reasonably deliver broadband to every person living in New Mexico, no matter where they live. The cost is just too great. We'll have to spend those dollars on something that we need more. But in general, we certainly need to do everything that we reasonably can to provide people adequate internet connections.
Oh, any other questions from the chat? So we will move on to the second question, which is, our state budget is being severely and negatively impacted by plummeting gas and oil prices. What measures would you take to address budget shortfalls? And what do you propose doing to strengthen and expand our economy to meet the socioeconomic and infrastructure needs of our diverse communities?
Well, I think I've addressed the economic question already pretty much, but the budget, you know, in the short term, we have very few choices. We're going to have to cut spending on everything that can be cut. We're going to need to draw on all our reserve funds and beat the bushes for any other dollars that might be available. But beyond the short term, we need to do something different, and we need to keep two facts in mind. One fact is that oil and gas, the good times have gone, and we have no reason to expect that they will be coming back. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is that whereas we are 46th in per capita income, we are 12th in per capita expenditures of state and local governments. So obviously, we're just not getting value for our dollars. It's not just a question of getting more money and spending more money. We have to get more value. The money has to be spent more efficiently. And of course, there are no simple answers when you're talking about increasing government efficiency, but I think there are a number of things that could be done. And one thing that could be done absolutely is to reform our capital outlay system. Right now, it's a little pork barrel for every legislator, a bigger pork barrel for the governor. The money is spent for the most part in dribs and drabs on minor projects, sometimes over a span of numerous years. The waste, the inefficiency, the additional transactional costs, they are just unbelievable. And those expenditures need to be thought about, planned, voted on by people who have some idea of what the heck they're voting for. And when they are funded, they need to be funded 100% so that they can be built and put into service in a timely way. Now, you might say, oh, well, nobody's going to agree to that because this is the way we've done it forever and ever. But the fact of the matter is, we can't keep on doing this. It's just too costly. If we want to have money for early childhood education and other things, we need to start spending less money on things that we simply don't need or that can be done much more efficiently.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions. Let's see. First one is, you've mentioned that it's impractical to offer broadband to all New Mexicans. Since broadband affords rural families and communities vital communication and connection, do you have a workaround, a plan B?
Well, you can't give everything to everybody. I mean, that's what it boils down to. Now, I understand there's some new technologies coming online here that will involve satellites. So maybe there is some sort of technological fix, but I cannot, solve everybody's problem. And I can't promise, no, I do not have a plan B. I can't hear you. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to turn my mic back on. So do you see any positive opportunities that this pandemic has created from an economic point of view?
Well, if this pandemic motivates some reforms, then there is a possibility of an upside. And it's not so much at the state level, it's at the federal level. Our healthcare system is the biggest mess conceivable, unbelievably inefficient. It provides very poor results. I mean, obviously, this pandemic has shown the folly of connecting health insurance to employment. If there is one good thing that will come out of this pandemic, I hope it is that this will finally be the impetus for moving us in the United States overall, to a universal healthcare system, which is somewhat similar to those that every other industrialized country in the world has. I hope that this is the shock that will push people forward.
Okay, thank you. One last question. Do you support the Health Security for New Mexicans campaign? And will you support the Health Security Act in 2021 legislative session? If you do think that it can be passed in 2021.
I'm not familiar with the Health Security Act, so I can't answer the question.
Okay, well,
but I will say this. The fixes that we need have to occur at the federal level. At the state level, all we can do is just fiddle around with the details. It's got to be a federal thing. We got to get rid of Trump. Got to get rid of the Republicans in the Senate.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. I am going to turn you over to Paula, who will cover the next two questions.
Hello, Alan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you everyone who's here. Let's move on to question 3. Alan, what are your ideas for New Mexico transitioning to a more resilient and inclusive, clean economy? Will we be able to stick with whatever plan you have? And what will be the timeline for your plan, given the New Mexico economy following COVID-19?
Well, you know, global warming trumps everything. It's the most important environmental issue of all time. It's the most important moral issue of all time. Because if we don't get a handle on it, then billions of people in the third world are going to die. That's just a factual statement. So we need to do everything that we reasonably can to lead by example and reduce our fossil fuel consumption. We don't need to worry about reducing the supply because fossil fuels are just like drugs. As long as there is a demand, there will be a supply somehow. But if there's no demand, then the supply just becomes irrelevant. And I think there are a lot of things that we can do. I would focus on two of them. First of all, it is really important to keep the price of electricity as low as possible, because the cheaper electricity is, the more people will be induced, the easier it will be to persuade people to move from fossil fuels to electricity. And one thing that we can certainly do is to introduce some competition into the area of electrical generation. The other thing I think that we need is a carbon tax at the state level. Now, everybody would say, oh, this cannot be done because, don't you know, it's the third rail of politics or whatever. The carbon tax ought to be an extra charge on gasoline or diesel production or sales, and it ought to be offset dollar for dollar with a reduction in another regressive tax, specifically the gross receipts tax on electricity. If people see that the extra tax is being used for any purpose, is being spent for any governmental purpose, then they'll have a fit and they'll fight it tooth and nail. But if it is presented and operated just as a transfer payment, dollar for dollar, then I think it would be something that that could be sold. And
okay, and that's your time. Thank you so much. All right, let's move on now to our last question. Question 4. Our state law criminalizing abortion predates Roe v. Wade and would be in effect if Roe v. Wade is overturned. What specific measures will you take to provide accessible, affordable, quality, and safe abortion and reproductive health care for women in New Mexico? What are you going to do to make sure we can have this?
well, a woman's right to choose, unfortunately, is up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And with the appointment of Kavanaugh, I think that Trump and McConnell have already done their damage. I expect that Roe v. Wade will be overturned in a year or maybe two. So it is a question of what we do in the post-Roe landscape. I think there's a couple of things that we should not do. One of them is I don't think that we should, demand that Roe v. Wade be resurrected in some way, because that simply won't happen. I also don't favor trying to terrorize politicians into voting the right way by primarying them. Not that I disagree with that tactic, but I don't think it really works. So I think the thing to be done is to go to the voters and to persuade the voters that the criminalization of abortion is really a road that they don't want to go down, that it would be worse than the war on drugs, because the war on drugs, the primary victims were fools and knaves, but the primary victims of the war on abortion will be very ordinary people, and in particular, young, poorly educated, low-income women. If we can persuade the voters, then the politicians will follow right along. But trying to persuade the politicians before we have prepared the ground with the voters, that's a very hard sell. So what would I do? We need to prepare. We need to persuade the public. I don't see any shortcuts to the situation.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. All right, So we're done with our questions. Before we close, we'd like to give you 1 minute for a closing statement. And before you start that, I just want to thank you so much for being here with us this evening and participating in our virtual forum. And so I'm going to go ahead and give you 1 minute.
Thank you. District 10 has gone Republican the last 6 times. It's not going to be won by preaching to the choir. By any objective measure, Dave Simon should have won it in 2016. He was by far the better candidate, but he lost. And I think there's an important lesson in that, and that is that we can take nothing for granted. If we're going to win District 10, we have to reach out to all the voters, to independents, to Republicans who are uneasy about Trump, to conservative Democrats whose support is not assured. And we need to reach out to people who have moral concerns about abortion. We don't have to agree with them in any way, but we have to show all those people a certain respect and a certain courtesy. And that is what I'm going to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Alan. If you are a District 10 resident, thank you so much